Todd Dunn here. Today I'd like to welcome you to the first in a fairly long series of videos about my 1936 wooden powerboat Tortuga. In this series of videos, what I intend to do is show you Tortuga from the time I found the boat, through the purchase, through the rebuilding process, which was quite extensive, to the present day. The initial parts of this series date back to 2007, before I had video capability. So what you're going to get for the first few videos are actually narrated slideshows in which I show you pictures of Tortuga, the way I found it, and during the rebuild process, and explain what you're looking at. Before I do that, I'd like to start out with just a few words about what led me to initially find Tortuga and then buy the boat. My interest in boats of this type goes back to the early 70s when I was a student at the University of Washington in Seattle. During that time, I lived south of the university across Portage Bay and commuted to the university, normally on foot or by bicycle, across the University Bridge, which is a drawbridge. Periodically, I would get to the bridge when it was open and have to wait for the bridge to close. While I was doing that, I tended to look down at the water of Portage Bay from the bridge, and down below the bridge there were a couple of Lake Union Dreamboats and Blanchard 36s moored. These are classic 20s vintage boats with a raised foredeck, nice cabin house, often completely enclosed, classic Northwest cruising boats. I fell in love with the design back then, more than 40 years ago. Since then, I have periodically looked online for wooden boats of that type to see just what was for sale, how much they cost, etc., with the dream of someday owning one, although I never expected to actually own one. Then, in 2007, I found a boat during one of my periodic searches that was only about 30 miles from where I live here in Maine. So naturally, even though at the time I had no intention of buying the boat, I called up the broker and arranged to go take a look at the boat, just so I could see one of these boats in person. This first video is a series of slides in which I will show you what Tortuga looked like when I first saw the boat in September of 2007. I hope that you're going to enjoy this series, that you'll subscribe to my channel, and watch all the videos as they come up over the next few weeks. Thank you very much. After I saw the ad for Tortuga and contacted the broker, we made an appointment to go over to Sedgwick, Maine, to the Doug Highland boatyard where the boat was in storage. This is the way the boat looked as we drove up to it. It was sitting at the extreme edge of the yard right next to the woods, had no cover on it except for the fitted cover over the cabin house, so the boat was more or less exposed to the elements and had been for about 4 years. Let me at this point give you a little bit of history of the boat before I go on to talk about the condition that I found it to be in. This boat was built in 1936 in Sausalito, California on San Francisco Bay by the Nunes Brothers Boat and Ways Company. The boat spent its entire life up until about 2000 in San Francisco Bay, going back and forth from between owners in Sausalito, Green Bay, and San Francisco itself. When the fellow I bought it from bought it in 2000, he had the boat trucked to Maine and launched here, and he used it for about 2 to 3 years before he decided it was leaking a little bit too much and took it over to the Highland Boatyard in Sedgwick, Maine to be evaluated for possible repair. Looking at the boat right here in this picture, you can see some of the work that was done to evaluate the boat. The vertical dark stripes on the hull are where the boatyard workers scraped off the paint to reveal fasteners. You can't see it, but a little further aft behind some of the shrubbery they actually removed a couple of planks, and I'll show you a picture of that in a second. Also at the bow, at the turn of the keel below the waterline, they had scraped some paint off, revealed dark black punky wood indicating that the forward end of the keel was rotted. So that was the condition. The boatyard gave the fellow a very, very high estimate, about more than 10 times what he paid for the boat to repair it. So it just sat until I saw it in 2007. So let's continue and look a little bit more at the boat. We'll start with the hull and then we'll move inside. This picture shows the leading edge of the keel below the waterline from the port side. You can really see the dark wood which is rotted here, and when I looked closely at this spot I could see that in fact the bevel that had been cut into the keel for the garboard, the bottommost plank to land on, was completely rotted away. So this was one of the spots where the boat was leaking significantly. You can also see a rather shoddy repair that was done at some time in the past. If you notice the through hull fitting in the hull just below the waterline, if you go above that and forward or to the left in this picture, you can see that an over-width plank has been fitted, because apparently the top edge of the plank that has the through hole in it was rotted and the plank above it was rotted. So they fitted in what's called a steeler plank to fill a gap rather than replace both planks. So this was work that would have to be done to fix the boat and get it ready to use again. This picture is on the starboard side again, back a bit aft of amidships, and this is right down by the keel where you can see that 2 pieces of planking have been removed. You can also see that the frames are pretty crummy looking. Looks like there's a lot of rot. The frames have also been sistered. And this particular spot is actually under the engine, and you can see the floors that support the engine. So this was also an area that indicated that the boat would need significant repairs. But the planking itself largely seemed sound. So when I initially looked the boat over, I expected to maybe replace a few frames under the engine. And since, as you'll see, the engine is a gasoline engine, I didn't intend to keep the engine, so I knew I would be pulling the engine out, and it would be pretty easy to replace these frames and then simply put in some new short pieces of planking. So at this point the hull looked like it was in sort of fair to poor condition, but it could be brought back relatively easily. After I finished looking at the hull, I climbed up onto the boat. I didn't remove the cover over the cabin house. We simply opened it up and went in through the aft doors into the cabin house. This is the first view I got as I stepped on board and looked forward. You can see in this picture that the interior looks a lot better than the hull. So this was really heartening. The interior looked good. It didn't look like I was going to need to do much, at least not in this picture. In the picture here on the left-hand side, you can see the helm station. It has a port side helm, which is a little bit unusual. Most boats have starboard side helms. Below the life ring, the box there is the engine cover. It extends over the top of the engine. And just to the right of that is the passageway down into the main cabin. But I really like the look of the cabin. Nice white cabin with varnished mahogany trim. Next, I turned around and looked aft at the aft end of the cabin. The cabin house enclosed about the forward 3/4 of the cabin, and the last quarter of the cabin was enclosed not by the wooden house with glass windows, but by a canvas enclosure with plastic windows. However, at the aft end of the cabin, there was a nice built-in seat, and when I went below, I would find the cushions for it. So overall, the cabin looked pretty good. You can also see a little bit of the varnished Douglas fir floor or cabin sole that I thought looked very nice. Before I went below, I lifted up the engine box to take a look at the engine. This picture is a little dark, but it does show the engine, and you can note a couple features. One, it's a big engine. You can see the spark plugs on top that indicate that this is a gasoline engine. In fact, it's a Chrysler Crown Flathead 6 gasoline engine. A couple of noteworthy features here. At the aft end of the engine, you can see the gearbox, which is very large. And at the forward end, you can see that the engine actually extends through the forward bulkhead of the upper cabin house into the lower cabin house. My initial thought here was that I would take this engine out because I really don't like gasoline engines in a boat. and replace it with a much smaller diesel, thereby getting rid of the penetration into the forward cabin house. Another interesting thing you can see here is if you look at the bottom of the engine, you can see a couple of bright spots. That's the grass underneath the boat where the planks are missing. Next, I stepped below. From the base of the companionway stairs, on the starboard side, looking forward, you can see that the boat has a small dinette with a mahogany table. Over the mahogany table is a nice hurricane oil lamp. You can see a couple of the bronze opening ports. The interior is all white with varnished mahogany trim. Forward of the dinette is a small locker, and then just forward of that is the head. Looking forward on the port side, the boat has a nice sized settee. The back of the settee folds up to make a second berth, so the boat has two berths in a sort of bunk bed style. Forward of the settee is another locker, and then forward of that is the head, which you can see a lot better in this picture. You can see the head itself, which is an original Wilcox Crittenden skipper, probably dating from when the boat was new. And then there's a locker, which goes into the chain locker, and a mirror above, and you can see a cabinet on the upper left. Finally, looking aft from up at the door to the head, you can see I've folded up the upper berth to show the bunk bed setup. And we can also see part of the galley. Straight aft is a cabinet which covers the front edge of the engine. Above that there's a small shelf and another enclosed cabinet. To the right, a spice rack. Out of sight to right behind the bulkhead was the sink. On the left hand side of this picture, starboard side of the boat, there's another cabinet which had an Origo 2-burner alcohol stove inset into it. Overall, I very much liked the interior of the boat. The interior was in very good shape. I could find no rot or other damage anywhere in the interior. It made me feel really positive about the boat, and I really, as I said, liked the look of the interior. And that basically, along with perhaps an overly optimistic, as we'll see, view of the condition of the hull, led me to go ahead and make an offer on the Tortuga. My next video is going to show bringing the boat home and the first work I did on the Tortuga. So I hope you look forward to seeing that, and it will be another slideshow because these pictures date from 2007, before I had the capability to shoot video. Okay, thank you. I hope you enjoyed this little presentation and have a better feel for just what the Tortuga, my 1936 motor yacht, looked like when I saw it the first time.